And welcome to the City of Dana Point special City Council meeting for August 9, 2021. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Please let the record show that all council members are present.
Thank you very much. Mr. City Attorney, would you confirm that we do not need closed session tonight?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. There's no
right.
closed session this evening.
Thank you. Then we'll get down to business. Let's start off with Mayor Pro Tem Miller leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, thank you. Madam Clerk, do we have any ordinance titles to read tonight?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have 4 ordinance titles tonight. Before you tonight is the second reading of an ordinance entitled, An Ordinance of the City Council of the City of Dana Point, California, approving the General Plan Amendment GPA 20-0001, which amends the general plan land use element by modifying the land use designation of commercial residential and creating new land use designations of commercial Main Street and commercial industrial, with changes to land use designations, development intensity, and residential density standards, and submission of a GPA 20-0001 as Local Coastal Program Amendment LCPA 20-0001 for approval and certification by the California Coastal Commission, and a second reading of an ordinance entitled, An Ordinance of the City Council of the City of Dana Point, California, approving Zone Text Amendment ZTA 20-0001 and Zone Change ZC 20-0001 to establish Chapter 9.14 Doheny Village Districts of the zoning ordinance and to change the zoning district designations of the project area and submission as part of Local Coastal Program Amendment LCPA 20-0001 for approval and certification by the California Coastal Commission. Also before you tonight is the first reading of an ordinance entitled, An Ordinance of the City Council of the City of Dana Point, California, approving Zone Text Amendment ZTA 19-0002I to modify the zoning code related to joint parking provisions and public notification and submission as part of Local Coastal Program Amendment LCPA 19-0002 for approval and certification by the California Coastal Commission, and a first reading of an ordinance entitled, An Ordinance of the City Council of the City of Dana Point, California, approving Zone Text Amendment ZTA 19-0002 II to modify the zoning code related to accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units.
Thank you very much. We'll start tonight with the consent calendar like we always do. All matters listed under the consent calendar considered to be routine will be enacted by one roll call vote. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless unless members of the council, public, or staff request that certain items be removed for separate action. Madam Clerk, are there any items to be removed by the public?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Item 8 and item 9.
All right. Staff?
No, sir.
Council? Okay, so item number
I'll move
8.
the balance.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Miller. I will second the balance. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that brings us to item number 8 then. The state regulations affecting commercial harbor craft. The recommended action is that the City Council receive a presentation from Sports Fishing Association of California regarding proposed regulations from California Air Resources Board. Do we have a list of commenters, or is it just the Sport Fishing Association that wants to speak?
We have a list of
Bring
commenters.
them up. Okay. Okay. All right. First is Donna Calez from San Clemente.
The city council and to the city manager and to the assistant city manager. My name is Donna Calez, and along with my family, we own Dana Wharf Sport Fishing and Whale Watching in Dana Point Harbor. In the beginning of the year, during COVID, we became aware of a commercial harbor craft potential ruling that would affect our boats in the future. So the California Air Resource Board puts laws or rules into effect that governs our emissions on our boats. During COVID, we were made aware of this new ruling that could potentially put us out of business. So as most of you know, we've been in Dana Point Harbor for 50 years, and we're the longest running business in the harbor. For the past 20 years, we have been repowering our boats to meet emission standards, and we've been following the protocols given to us. We have 17 boats in our fleet. This new ruling would affect 80% of our fleet. So we're very, very concerned, and that's why we're here today. We employ 50 to 75 employees, and we take out over 50,000 visitors annually on our sport fishing boats and our whale watching boats. We are also a local source of the economy, activity, jobs, tourism. As you can imagine, people come here, they stay in hotels, they go to restaurants. It's a huge economic driver. And so we're very, very concerned. Also, our boats, our sport fishing and our whale watching boats do a lot of donated fishing trips as well as take the general public out. But a list of those are Fish for Life, which takes out children fishing, Friends of Rollo, that we support the 5th Marine Support Group, Marine Corps League, school trips, everything that we do in the community, Santa boat rides, you name it, everything would halt. We would be out of business in 2026 if these rules took effect. Nothing like this has ever happened, and so we're very alarmed. My father is at home watching, and he really implores you to do all that you can to help us. In closing, I would just like to say, before I introduce Ken Frankie, that came here from San Diego and represents the Sport Fishing Association, I also brought my brother, and I have other members in the community that are here to support us. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. And then the next speaker is Mr. Ken Frankie. If you could just let us know your city of residence, please.
San Diego.
Okay, thank you. I'll remind you have 3 minutes, so try to keep it to that, please.
We're going to do our best. I'm from the Sport Fishing Association of California. I'm the president. And what Donna Calez just said is not an exaggeration. This is exactly what we're facing right now. It's a statewide issue. Dana Point, as you know, your harbor is amazing. It's got whale watching, sport fishing. It's a huge economic driver. The entire region is affected and serviced by these vessels. CARB, the bottom line is they have a proposal that is unfeasible. They openly admit it is unfeasible. However, they've given a very hard and fast timeline to start taking boats out of service. And at the end of the road, when this rule goes into effect, which is January 1st, 2023, all grant monies immediately stop to the fleet. They have been voluntarily, Donna Calez and her family have voluntarily been upgrading engines to new tier engines, the cleanest, best engines that are out there. That all goes by the wayside. Conversely, the commercial fishing vessels that operate offshore, they've been given the deal that was originally had by all of these vessels, which is you get to participate in grants, you can continue to replace your engines, and continue to protect the environment with low emissions. Again, these are the vessels that the low economic community folks, this is the only way they get to go in the ocean, the people that don't own a yacht. If you take a look at the picture in the upper right or lower right corner there, that's called the diesel particulate filter. It is a monster. Their idea is to put that on that little sport fishing boat right there. The Coast Guard's not going to go for it. It's going to cause a lack of stability. I've been a captain in the fleet 40 years. This isn't a safe thing, not in my opinion, and I doubt it with the Coast Guard as well. You've seen those tractor truck rigs parked on the side of the freeway, revving up their engines. It's to burn out the emissions out of that filter system. When we're out at sea and I got 30 people on a boat, I got nowhere for the people to get off if I've got a problem. That's serious. I do not want to have families going out in the ocean with this kind of equipment on it. Coast Guard's engaged because of we've asked them to do that. But the bottom line is we're going to need the support of all the coastal communities to weigh in on this. This is going to have a very serious effect. CARB staff themselves have already said most fiberglass and wooden boats are going to need to be replaced, and all vessels that can't fit this equipment. That's every single boat in your harbor, every single one of the commercial passenger boats, including the ferry boat to Catalina as well. It's all of them. So in closing, we could really use your help. We have a coalition we formed, but we do think that having all of the communities and all the city councils and chambers joining with us, that we can get the governor to switch his position and permit us to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker is Vicky McMurtry from the city of San Clemente and the Dana Point City Council. Sorry, Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you. All right. Good evening, Mayor Federico, City Council, City Manager, City Attorney, and staff. My name is Vicky McMurtry. I'm the Executive Director of the Dana Point Chamber of Commerce. I'm here tonight to support the Sport Fishing Association of California and inform you that our Board of Directors recently voted to join the coalition opposed to CARB regulations. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, on a state level, recreational fishing contributed $5.6 billion annually in economic activity, supporting nearly 40,000 California jobs. I don't have to tell you that as the dolphin and whale watching capital of the world, and more recently receiving the first whale heritage site designation in the Americas, sport fishing and whale watching businesses are a major contributor to Dana Point's economy, drawing tourists from all over the world, supporting local jobs, and generating tax revenue for public services. The sport fishing industry embraces the need to reduce engine emissions, securing air quality grants over the years to upgrade vessels with cleaner burning engines. However, the Dana Point Chamber believes Harborcraft engine regulations, recently proposed by CARB, places an undue burden on family-owned boating operations. As you saw from the presentation this evening, the proposed regulations are riddled with issues anywhere from the fact that their proposed technology doesn't exist, is potentially a safety concern for passengers and crew, and regulations mean that owners will no longer be able to seek grant funding. Unfortunately, for many boat owners, the option of financing new boats is not possible when existing boats have little to no resale value once deemed non-compliant in California. To further impact boat owners' abilities to do business, these proposed regulations can result in passenger loads being reduced by over 40% to account for the new engine modifications that are greater in size and weight. Unlike automobiles, the regulations will go into effect before the lifespan of boats or engines expire. If the regulations are adopted in November this year, boat owners will have to decide as soon as January 2023 whether they can afford new steel vessels or go out of business. Consequently, the proposed regulations force boat owners into an unattainable position where the small business fleet operators can't afford to purchase the new vessels, and reconstructed vessels are too expensive to operate with the reduced loads, resulting in fewer ticket sales and lower revenue. As a result, the sport fishing industry estimates the state will run many boat owners out of business within 3 to 6 years after the new regulations are implemented. What's even more frustrating is that these proposed regulations were drafted during the pandemic, before the owners of sport fishing and whale watching boats can even recover from their financial losses from COVID-19. Their livelihoods are once again being unfairly threatened. As a community, I believe that we share the state's desire to reduce engine emissions. However, the regulations as drafted will adversely affect sport fishing and whale watching businesses and coastal communities economically dependent on a strong and vibrant hospitality and tourism industry. It is our sincere belief that more time can be spent on alternative, attainable regulations that are better vetted and researched, including taking the time to host public workshops, consult the U.S. Coast Guard, and actually speak to the Sport Fishing Coalition itself. As a chamber and visitor center, we know firsthand that sport fishing and whale watching brings dollars to our economy, keeps people employed, and ensures proper education and preservation of our precious marine life. We hope that you will agree with us and write to Governor Newsom and consider new regulations.
Thank you, and thanks for doing your best to stick with the time. Next speaker is Jim Holden from San Clemente.
Good afternoon. So my name is Jim Holden, and I run a program called Fish for Life. We take special needs kids fishing. And we're one of the many programs that the Dana Wharf supports. You know, we've been doing this for 12 years. You know, we have a long list of families just waiting to go on these trips. You know, these families with special needs kids, tend to feel like outcasts of society. And this is just a perfect experience for them. And I'll tell you, and we've also recently expanded to New Jersey. We've done trips out of New Jersey, and we're soon going to expand to Hawaii. Neither one of those states have anything at all like the demands California's considering, you know. And, you know, just the impact of these trips for these families is just absolutely tremendous. And I mean, fishing is part of our culture here, you know, and you know, they've gone to great lengths trying to reduce emissions and whatnot. And we could sure appreciate your voice in Sacramento to stop this unreasonable request. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And next speaker is Hoyen Ip from San Clemente, or from Dana Point, sorry.
Good evening. Hoyen Yip, Sierra Club. By the way, I like Monday council meeting, so we can get this out of the way for the rest of the week. So both the Sierra Club and American Lawn Association sent council public comment letters. When I read the Lawn Association's report that Orange County's air quality only got an F, that didn't suit my Orange County ego too well. So I actually wondered if this good air quality by their standard was possible at all. So I clicked that link. Actually, a number of counties got A's, such as Monterey County. And there's an article that the Sierra Club quoted from San Francisco Chronicle titled, "Silent Death Lurks for Pleasure Boaters." So I just want to read one little paragraph here. Marine engines, not subject to the same emission controls as cars, produce so much carbon monoxide that on calm days, invisible clouds of the odorless gas can form in the open air. Swimmers, boat passengers, possibly dock workers, and passers-by can be exposed to doses big enough to cause dizziness, unconsciousness, even death. So I wonder where this problem stands today. You know, I have been working on plastic reduction for years. The problem has only got worse. So I'm really curious about this. CARB says that the new regulations would reduce community health risk, attain regional air quality standards, and mitigate climate change. So let's invite CARB here. One, we should hear both sides of the story. And another thing is that we all have many questions for CARB to answer. So thank you.
Thank you very much. That is it for the speakers. The recommended action was that we receive a brief. Mayor Pro Tem Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is an interesting one for me, and it's one of the things that really frustrates me about government. This is a clear example of government overreach and unintended consequences. This thing was put together quickly without any thought to what the ramifications are going forward to the small business owner. When you start putting, first of all, let's start out with who these business owners are. Small sport, commercial fishing companies, well washing companies. These are organizations and people that are more concerned about the environment than almost anybody else. That's their livelihood. They're concerned about the quality of our ocean, our water, our air. The fisheries have to be strong, otherwise we don't have the marine life here that we're all enjoy observing or daily on some. We have a whale heritage site here. This is all because we're the dolphin and whale watching capital of the world, because we have organizations here that truly care about our environment. Donna Kalis is here tonight with the Dana Wharf Captains Dave's. They're partnered. These are two organizations that compete in the marketplace for these trips. They came together to make sure to earn the trademark of the Dolphin Whale Watching Capital of the World, because they understood the value that they could operate side by side, and this is their livelihood. So when I see things like this, and I watch people in Sacramento take a look at this, I can understand why they think it's a good idea. Air quality is important to all of us, but at what cost to the small business owner? They're a small part of the fleet. They're in boats that obviously the technology doesn't even exist for them to meet these standards. Why don't we take a pause on this, take a look at the impact on these small businesses, and let's see if there is a technology in the future that could actually benefit these guys. They'll implement it. You heard it tonight. They go out for grants. They're consistently and constantly upgrading their engines. I'm sorry, I'm struggling a little bit. I have a cold tonight and trying to get these words out. But they're constantly out there upgrading their engines to improve their emissions. So this is not something that they're standing here in front of us tonight and saying, we don't agree with this in terms of the air quality issue. They do agree with it, and they're trying to comply with those standards. But when you put regulations on an industry that are so restrictive, you're driving them out of business. That's an unintended consequence, I think. I hope that's an unintended consequence. Maybe it's not. But we as a city, when our very livelihood is based on tourism. People may or may not like that, but that's the fact of the matter is they're here. That's what we survive on. If one of the main tourist attractions to our community is taken away, and we haven't done anything about it to try to help them, I think we've done a huge disservice to all of our residents. And so, I heard about an article. I mean, Miss Yip, it's good to see you. We haven't seen you man, it's been over a year, I guess, since we've seen you here. And I appreciate all the work that you do. But when you read these articles talk about carbon monoxide levels, and these clouds can develop and people could be exposed. Those are fear tactics. I don't see any data that says it's ever happened. Yeah, it could, I guess. I mean, anything could happen. I could imagine it. But when we hear stuff like that, yeah, I want to see data around it. I want to see where it's actually happened and how it happened. And instead of just saying, oh, it could happen. Well, a lot of things could happen in this world that probably never will. So I'm going to make the recommendation tonight, and I'm going to make a motion right now that this council take a position that we oppose this legislation unless amended, if you would like to oppose unless amended, and we'll work with the sport fishing group and figure out what amendments would need to be made to that. Do we need to just get them back into, I think there's, what's the right term for it? An exemption for, the commercial fishing fleet, that they don't have to meet it, but they try to take the sport fishing out of that. Do a oppose unless amended position on this and send a letter up to Sacramento. I'll make that motion. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Miller. Any second on that? I will tell you, I'm inclined to second, although I think I would just like to oppose and let them work on amending it. I understand.
If that's a friendly amendment, I'll accept that.
Okay, all right. I just don't feel like that we're gonna, I would rather just oppose. You're okay with that? Then I will second that, and I'll explain myself before I let the rest of the council members talk. I am all for clean air, and I think all of us are. And I don't think that you have to support this CARB proposition in order to be in favor of clean air. There are other ways to go about this. They could amend this and come up with other things. But to me, at the end of the day, in a time when our governor is advertising that last year there was a $78 billion budget surplus. Where's the money in grants to help these small businesses comply or improve, upgrade their engines? The technology, let alone the technology in the CARB thing, doesn't exist yet. But if this was so important to Sacramento, you put your money where your mouth is, and they should have found money to help find some more efficient engines, get more efficient engines out there, grant money to help finance new boats. I mean, we realize like this industry is very much a finance. You're heavily invested in capital, and you buy these boats and you need them to last a long time. They didn't do any of that. In fact, they're taking grant money away. So quite frankly, I think bad on them, CARB, for not doing more in a time when there is money out there to get important things done. So I just don't like this rule legislation, and I'm happy to oppose it. So other council members, I guess we've got a motion and a second now. Any questions or discussion?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. For the first two speakers, if you guys can go back to the microphone. I'm curious. I heard two different things, I think, from each of you. One of the problems was that you couldn't meet the change in the regulation, and another thing I heard was you don't have enough time to meet it. Is it one or the other, or is it both? If you had more time, could you meet this regulation, or is it just an issue of this regulation is not acceptable?
The proposed equipment requirement is not feasible. It's not something that will fit on any one of their boats.
Regardless of time?
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
They will have to replace their boats, and that's basically what CARB is saying.
Okay. And can you give, I'm not a fisherman, I don't know anything about boat engines. Could you give some examples of things that you could do to lower emissions? Just some thoughts. You don't have to get too scientific on me, but what are things that you would have thought would have been reasonable? Because I agree with Ms. McMurtry and with the mayor. We all want to see, a cleaner environment. But what are some things that could have been done?
That is an excellent question. The commercial fishing industry, which is exponentially bigger than this group, we've been with that group all along. And they've replaced engines with the new electronic engines. The fuel type is a lower emissions fuel type they use. The electronic monitoring of the equipment, whatever is the newest, best equipment possible is what goes on each time an engine or a boat gets rebuilt or repowered. The industry is completely supportive, as you all alluded to, of reducing emissions. Every step that can be possibly made that's feasible is being done. And if the newest, bestest technology comes out, I think everybody'd be all for putting that on there as well. But it can't be a utopia model. It's got to be something that you can really do. The gold standard right now is what's called a Tier 3 engine. And the commercial fishing fleet and our fleet, through grant money, has been putting those engines on the boats throughout the fleet. We continue to want to do that. With this rule, we won't have hardly anybody be able to financially apply for engines anymore. So any effort to reduce emissions in the future stops right there.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thanks. Anybody else? Mr. Victoric.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sir, while you're there at the podium, I might as well ask you a question too. First of all, you very sympathetic. Have our support in what you're trying to do. What you're asking us is to take a position that will help you in Sacramento. So my question is, we have a motion talking about oppose. It was originally made as oppose unless amended. Honestly, and I guess for my fellow councilman, I'm going to vote to support either one, but I do have a question. I don't, and so I'm going to ask you, and we're here trying to help you. Have you thought through what those two positions might mean? Which one might be preferable to you if we were to take such a position, either oppose unless amended or just flat out oppose?
Yeah, good question. In simple terms, we don't want to be objectionable to emissions reduction. We've been willing all along to work with CARB collaboratively to get the best, newest model of whatever aboard the boats. So oppose unless amended, I think would reach that accomplished goal if we could get CARB to be willing to come to the table. So far, they've been very hard and fast about what they intend to do. But we're trying to keep that door open of being reasonable in whatever we're trying to undertake.
Okay, thank you. That answers my question. And so I'll just make a couple comments, which I was going to make. I tend to think that is a better position to take, and I think our speaker sort of spelled it out why, so I won't go on and on about that. But I guess what I would suggest, I don't know if I have to make a substitute motion if it's, okay. Those are my comments. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I will, yeah, I'm going to change the motion before you talk. Then you only have to talk once. Mr. City Attorney, can I just withdraw? I'm going to withdraw my amendment that, and I will.
Yes, you can do that.
All right. And then I guess we need a second for yours because I made the second. I'll still second yours. We're good now, legal, and we can keep going. Mr. Frost?
I was going to echo everything you guys said. Miss Ip, I did want to mention, I would actually be okay if CARB came and spoke with us. I would. They've got on here a little table. They say we can save $2.9 billion. They say they can monetize it. So theoretically, if somebody was able to monetize that and use those benefits to, I guess, fund all the additional costs these folks had to incur, if somebody could bring to us some sort of proposal like that, I would listen. I would tend to think, that's really the issue is, with the benefits, are we able to make these people whole? And then one other thing I'd like to point out is with environmental changes, I'm most familiar with sort of rolling things out like furnaces. We don't go make everybody in Orange County go get a brand new furnace. Right. And so as you get a new furnace, you have to get an upgraded one. And now it meets South Coast air quality standards. It does seem a little bit perplexing to me that all of a sudden we take one small business group and all of a sudden they've got to change everything out when we ourselves sort of roll things out. But those would be my only comments. Everything else you guys hit on was spot on.
All right. Anything else? Mayor Pro Tem Miller.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I appreciate Councilmember Vic Sork bring that up. As I sat here thinking about it, like I said, I'm on some cold meds tonight. I'm a little slow, but the oppose unless amended, the reason I brought that up was exactly for what the speaker said. We're not opposed to air quality improvements. We all want them. We want to make sure that our natural resources are protected and are here for everybody to enjoy into the future. I guess if we're going to take that position, we need to have some amendments that we're going to recommend. And I haven't heard any tonight. Would it be as simple to say, add the sport fishing fleet back into the commercial fleet? Would that be enough? Would CARB listen to that? Or do we need to say, let them phase this in as they have to redo their boats? Then we have to take a look at it at that point. But a good point was made that if you have to take this boat out of service because it doesn't meet air quality requirements, it now has zero value. And if the speaker would like to come back up and give us an idea of what kind of amendment would you like to see in this?
Yes, the governor had an executive order that started part of this. And in his executive order, he requested that CARB be tasked with coming up with feasible recommendations that would save emissions. I think that would be along the lines of what the amendment should be, that CARB work with industry to develop feasible guidelines that can be implemented with the goal of reducing emissions and permit the industry to continue to obtain grant money to collaboratively replace equipment as new technology is developed. I think that solves it for everybody.
All righty. Madam Clerk, did you get that? Because that
Yes,
will
sir.
be my amendment. Oppose unless amended with that amendment. That'll be the motion.
Okay, and I will still second that. It's quite frankly the only reason I didn't want to oppose with unless
Because we
amended,
didn't have
because
it.
we were going to have to fight through what the amendment
Yeah.
was going to be. I'm good with that, so I will
I
still
think that
second
was very
that.
clearly stated, and
Yeah.
unless somebody has an issue with that, that'll be the
Good.
motion.
Good. All right. Any other questions or discussion? Madam Clerk, do you want to call the vote?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Frost. Councilmember Vixoric.
Aye.
Councilmember Villar.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Miller.
Aye.
Mayor Federico.
Aye.
That motion passes 5-0.
Thank you, everybody, and thanks for the speakers who came out to help educate on this. Item number 9 is Gypsum Canyon Veterans Cemetery. The recommended action is that the City Council adopt a resolution entitled, "A Resolution of the City Council of the City of Dana Point, California, supporting a veterans cemetery at Gypsum Canyon and Anaheim Hills." We've got 2 speakers on this. Bill Cook from Mission Viejo. Go ahead, sir. Yep.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's an honor and privilege to be here to speak to you this evening. I am Bill Cook of Mission Viejo. I am a United States Marine Corps Vietnam veteran. I'm the chairman of the Orange County Veterans Memorial Park Foundation and a board member of Valor. I'm here to speak to you this evening to encourage you and speak in gratitude of your resolution in support of the Gypsum Canyon Cemetery site. There are 130,000 veterans residing in Orange County. We have neither a veterans cemetery or a veterans hospital in Orange County. That's always been something that sticks in my craw. In 1999, when BRAC took MCAS El Toro away, which was a place where I served, which is a place where I departed from there to Vietnam with a plane load of essentially boot cannon fodder that I had brought up from Camp Pendleton. A number of those probably did not ever return home, and it was the last time they stood on American soil. We always felt that MCAS El Toro was the proper place for a veterans cemetery. From 1999, for about a decade, we were just voices crying in the wilderness. We were getting nowhere. For the better part of the last decade, we have been striving inconclusively to land a site and a cemetery at MCAS El Toro, and our frustration has caused us to turn away and go to someplace where it would be realistic. A couple of years ago, when the Orange County Cemetery District took us out to the Gypsum Canyon site, which is out at the corner of the 91 freeway and the 241 toll road, and they took us to the top of the hill and said, "This is the site." And we looked down that 91 freeway as if we could see all the way out to the ocean. And they said, "This is a 280-acre site. Half of it's going to be a state veteran cemetery when we get there, and you guys get your pick of the ground." Well, heck, we took the high ground. It is going to be a magnificent veteran cemetery. It's going to be a monument in Orange County that will be revered for the next century. We thank you for being among the first cities to adopt a resolution. There will be many, many, many more following you because we have our agenda stacked up for the next several weeks at least. The County Board of Supervisors has already granted $20 million in money to get this thing forward. And in quick conclusion, I will quote Abraham Lincoln at Gettysburg. It's altogether fitting and proper that we do this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And Wayne Yost from Dana Point.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, City staff, members of our community, my name is Wayne Yost. I'm a 42-year resident of Dana Point, and I'm the Senior Vice Commander for all of the Veterans of Foreign Wars posts in Orange County and the Inland Empire. This Veterans Cemetery project started in earnest about a decade ago. The original site, as Bill stated, was slated to be at the Marine Corps Air Station El Toro, which is located within the city limits of the city of Irvine. Since many Orange County vets have served or been deployed overseas at that location, it seemed fitting that that's where it be. It was necessary to have a specific location in the plan so that the artist site, which was the area located by the hangars and the runway, was submitted to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs as our preferred site. Eventually, it became evident that the artist site would be untenable because of the hazardous waste removal costs and other political factors. The Irvine Company had donated approximately 125 acres of the total area in the Gypsum Canyon site to be located in northwest Anaheim, and that 125 acres approximately would be designated as a veteran cemetery. On July 1st of this year, a large rally was held at the Gypsum Canyon location. All of the Orange County Board of Supervisors, mayors from numerous cities, including Anaheim, over 29 veteran support groups, the Orange County District Attorney, representatives from Congressman Lou Correa, and other civic leaders were in attendance. If you'll please refer to the flyer that I provided for all of you, you can see all of the organizations that support this. I recently attended and spoke at the Anaheim and Yorba Linda City Council meetings, where they both voted affirmatively to support a veteran cemetery at Gypsum Canyon. The Orange County Supervisors, as Bill mentioned, has already slated $20 million to development of this site. On behalf of our veterans in the Orange County area, I'm requesting that the city of Dana Point join our other Orange County cities and give formal support for a veteran cemetery to be established at the Gypsum Canyon location. Our veterans have fought, bled, and died to protect the liberties and the way of life that we all enjoy today. I urge you to please give your support for this cemetery. If you have any other questions, myself and Bill are available to help you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yost. Semper Fi, Mr. Cook, and I will move that we adopt the resolution.
I'll second it.
All right. Any questions or discussion?
I actually have just a procedural question for Mr. Yost, or I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. Bill, Mr. Cook. Procedurally, what does come next? How does this? First of all, I also served at El Toro. I was actually in the last air show that we had there, which is one of my proudest moments in the Marine Corps. Was flying in that air show, and the fact that we can't get a national cemetery there or a veteran cemetery there really does disappoint me, to say the least. But I'm glad you guys didn't give up. So thank you for continuing to move forward. But what is the procedure? What next happens? You can just kind of give me the high level version.
Well, there is a certain restriction to what we can put there due to what is known as the VA Millennium Rule. The VA Millennium Rule states a proximity where we cannot put a federal veteran cemetery within a certain range of a federal veteran cemetery that has capacity. In our case, we come into the orbit of Riverside. So it's always been a state veteran cemetery that we are pursuing. And we consulted very early on with the Veterans Administration. They have told us that they expect this will be one of the busiest veteran cemeteries in the nation. And it will not only serve Orange County, it is the Southern California Veteran Cemetery. Next nearest state veteran cemetery is Central Coast in Monterey. And the next one is in Igo. I'm sure everybody knows where Igo is. For all our intents and purposes, it might as well be Oregon. It's in Redding. But this is the third veteran cemetery. Now, we've had enabling legislation that was put forward by Sharon Quirk Silva, which was AB 1453 going back several years. That has been modified again to AB 368 a couple of years ago, that did a study of 2 sites on MCAS El Toro, which reached to $700,000, which reached no conclusion. So we need to go on from there. We need to have, in accordance with CalVet's requirements to move this thing forward, we need enabling legislation in Sacramento, which we already have people willing to work on and sponsor. We have a majority of the Southern California delegation is in full support of it. We just need to convince Senator Umberg that he shouldn't be so recalcitrant, and we're working on him. We do have funds that are going to start, the $20 million, which will come in from the county. The county and the state are working on the mechanics of how they're going to do that. In order to meet the VA Cemetery Grant Program, which is something very easy to Google and look up and see the full requirements of, it needs to be owned either by the property needs to be owned either by a state or a tribal entity. And so the county, who owns the property now because it was gifted to the county by the Irvine Company, is working with their people to see the mechanics of transferring, pardon me, the actual title to the property to the state of California for the purposes of a veterans cemetery. And considering the bureaucratic gestation of Sacramento, this will take us probably another 18 months to 2 years. The major milestone that I see in my mind is the day that the county turns over to the state of California the title to that land to become a veteran cemetery. And then it's kind of like Winston Churchill said, it's not the end, but it's the end of the beginning. And then we're starting the process of building a veteran cemetery. We do expect that because all the contention has been taken away, that we will be able to solicit donations and contributions much more freely than we could have ever considered over the past decade. And that's where we're going to be, and we're going to be out pushing for that until they plant us.
Thank you for your service to our country. Thank you for your service to our community and continuing to serve our veterans. And thank you for figuring out this bureaucratic red tape and how to maneuver through it. I can't imagine that. So thank you for answering that question.
Just to expand a little bit on the cost factors, there are some very preliminary numbers thrown around to develop the site as far as bringing in utilities, electricity, gas, sewers, water, build some sort of a road infrastructure for ingress and egress, as well as building some administration buildings. The figures have been roughly thrown around at approximately $100 million for development. Now, keep in mind, this property is not just for veterans. Only approximately half of it is for veterans. The other half would be designated as a cemetery for non-veterans, which there is virtually no restriction on who's going to be interned there. We feel pretty confident that we can get commitments from various civic entities, state, county, local, of about $50 million, which means that we're looking at about $50 million that would have to be raised privately. I feel very comfortably that that is very attainable in the not too distant future. I think there's a good appetite amongst our community to give our veterans a resting place with dignity and a reasonable distance where their families can visit them.
Thank you, Mr. Yost. Madam Clerk, do you want to call a vote?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Frost. Councilmember Vixoric.
Aye.
Councilmember Villar.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Miller.
Aye.
Mayor Federico.
Aye.
That motion passes 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. All right. Moving on with our agenda tonight. That closes out our consent calendar, brings us to general public comments. Madam Clerk, do you have any in-person general public comments right now?
No in person, just the
Okay.
ones that were emailed.
All right, so I will not read the administrative notes on that, and I will let the public who might be watching know that the council did receive a number of written submitted public comments, and they were provided to us before the meeting. So thank you for those. That brings us to our public hearing tonight. Item number 11 is a local coastal program amendment, zone text amendment related to joint use of parking facilities and public notification, and zone text amendment related to accessory dwelling units. I'm not going to read out all of the ordinance titles because Madam Clerk read those at the beginning of the meeting. The recommended action tonight is that we conduct a public hearing, adopt a resolution approving and requesting certification of an LCPA related to the three items I just mentioned, and then introduce a first reading of an ordinance related to joint parking provisions and public notification, and introduce a first reading of an ordinance related to accessory dwelling units. I get that right, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Mr.
All
Mayor.
right, Mr. City Manager, staff report. Mr. City Attorney, staff report.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I think we have a presentation to go along with this report, if we could bring that up. So there are a couple of moving parts to this item. The meat of our presentation tonight relates to accessory dwelling units, although you may recall, at least those of you who were on the council prior to last November, that this item had been before you a couple of times back in the, one by memory, September, October-ish timeframe last year, after it had been to the Planning Commission. There are two items unrelated to ADUs that are part of what you're evaluating tonight. One relates to shared parking, the other relates to notices, and Ms. Wisniewski will focus on that. With respect to ADUs, I'm going to provide you with a little bit of an introductory. As you're aware, in 2020, January 1, 2020, state law changed relating to accessory dwelling units. A new law was enacted, became effective at that time, that purports to have nullified the city's prior laws relating to ADUs, with the exception of those that are part of our local coastal program. So our standards in the coastal zone were not impacted. The way the state law was prepared, in essence, it mandates accessory dwelling units. The city council has really very little discretion in terms of whether it can permit an accessory dwelling unit. These are things that we must allow if they meet certain criteria. There are two different types of criteria that the state came up with in this new legislation. The first are what we refer to as the mandatory approvals. Sometimes they're referred to as subdivision E, which relates to the statute, ADUs. And these are ADUs that if they meet certain criteria, the city must ministerially approve them. That's it. The law was designed to allow cities to have some flexibility where a city could make choices on certain aspects of the law if there weren't part of those subdivision E mandatory approvals. The city can adopt an ordinance that in essence regulates anything that's not specifically addressed by state law. And then some of the things that are expressly addressed by state law, the city has some choices in terms of what we can do. There's some constraints on us. Until we adopt an ordinance, which is what is before you this evening, state law applies. And there's been quite a bit of uncertainty on what state law is because it unfortunately is not that clear. I mean, just as an example, one of the things that's unclear is whether the entirety of our prior ordinance was nullified or only the provisions that conflict with state law. HDC, which is the state agency that's responsible for regulating this area, actually takes the position that only those portions of our ordinance that were in direct conflict with the new law are nullified. So it's a little unclear what state law is. That has resulted in some unfortunate conflicts with applicants in our community seeking to develop ADUs where they believe state law is one thing and we've come to the conclusion that we think it's something else. As a result of that, this process has been fast-tracked a little bit once we, I mean, it may not seem fast-tracked. Here we are, August, a year and a half almost later, but during the COVID time, not a whole lot was going on. And we've actually had the benefit of having a number of applications come through so that from the staff perspective, we've kind of gotten to be a little familiar what these things look like, which has enabled us to be in a better position to come up with, we think, with regulations that we think will be a benefit to the community. So in order to move this along quickly, though, because of the conflicts we're having, what you have before you tonight is an ordinance that will only apply outside of the coastal zone. And that might sound a little odd, but bear in mind that it's not unusual when we're dealing with development standards to have different standards in the coastal zone as compared to outside of the coastal zone. Just as a, for instance, you almost always have to have a coastal development permit for something in the coastal zone that you might not have to have outside of the coastal zone. So, it's not unusual to have that kind of a disparity. We will at some point address this law within the coastal zone, but in order to have clear black and white regulations for both our development community and for our staff to administer, we felt it was important to get this ordinance on the books now, to not address the coastal zone at this time because it will require us to interface with the coastal staff. The typical estimate for getting an LCP, a local coastal program amendment through, is about 18 months. We didn't want to be in a position where for 18 months we didn't know for certain what the law was. So rather than trying to do an ordinance that's comprehensive for the whole city, as I mentioned, this will only be for those areas outside of the coastal zone. Within the coastal zone, the current LCP has development standards for accessory dwelling units, and that those standards will continue to apply until we get to deal with that issue. That largely covers my introductory comments. Happy to answer any questions you may have, and I'll turn it over to Brenda.
Good evening, Mayor, Council members. Just have some numbers here to show you, to let you know what ADUs are happening in our community now, as well as what we anticipate in the future. This also highlights the fact that currently we have 3 ADUs in the coastal zone. So our predominant need is basically outside the coastal zone. And that's why the ordinance tonight is much appreciated. I think it's going to provide staff a lot of clear guidance to help our community. So jumping into the ordinance, the staff report as well as the ordinance is very detailed. It's very complicated, and it addresses all the different scenarios we anticipate. Thanks to, in large part, to Jennifer Farrell. She's been working hours on this. So the purpose of my presentation is to really provide your high-level summary. So as was mentioned, we have 3 categories of review of ADUs that we're proposing in the ordinance. The first is the mandatory approval. As was mentioned, the state law requires the city to approve certain types of accessory dwelling units, and the ordinance establishes clearly what those are. There's next level, non-mandatory, which is still have to be approved ministerially, but it does provide us some level of review. And then thirdly, we have created a process for discretionary approval so that we can consider other ADUs, provide our community a little more flexibility, but also a public process to allow neighbors and other community members to come out and look at what that project is before we move forward with those. And all 3 categories will be required to get an ADU permit as well as a building permit. So on to what ADUs actually are. Accessory dwelling units, they are permitted in single-family zones, either one dwelling unit, meaning an ADU, or one JADU. And a multifamily, just one attached ADU would be permitted. JADUs are not permitted in multifamily zones. So the bullets at the bottom, meaning height, size, setback, and parking, that's just one smidgen of the development standards, but those are primarily what the bulk of our interests are. So a mandatory ADU would be one that would be located entirely within the existing or proposed single-family home, would be no larger than 50% of the square footage of that home, and would be no larger than 800 square feet, actually. So that is a mandatory ADU that we must approve ministerially. So to trigger up the next level of what might be a one that is not mandatory, we'll see that they're going to be adding on square footage to the home. That would put it in category 2 of non-mandatory approval. It does allow us a higher level of review. With that type of ADU, we're able to look at things like design. Is architecture appropriate? Can we look at other issues, maybe location of windows to make sure they're not infringing upon any privacy? Those are the kind of things that we would do at a staff level, but still administer ministerially. So JADUs, those are units that are entirely within the existing unit, 500 square feet. And also, as I mentioned, is not in a permitted multifamily zone. A JADU is basically, it's still allows for an efficiency kitchen, but they actually can share a restroom with the rest of the home. So those are JADUs. And all would also be subject to deed restrictions. The deed restriction would be required for all ADUs, and that they cannot be sold. They cannot be rented for less than 30 days, so they cannot be a short-term rental. And also, JADUs must be occupied by the owner, either the JADU or the primary residence must be on site. And also, according to state law, we're able to include in the deed restriction that for ADUs, starting 2025, those also must be owner-occupied. And lastly, an HOA approval would be required for all types of ADUs. Affordable housing fee waiver, that was brought up by one of our council members, also been brought up by the community. And how do we know these are affordable? We can't require they be affordable, but our existing fee schedule that's adopted by City Council in October 2019 establishes a fee waiver for any residential unit that is deed restricted affordable. So today we're able to offer any ADU that comes forward a waiver of not only building permit fees, but also the development fees. For instance, if they had to get a site development permit or the ADU permit fee. So we have this in our code currently. We do have, we are open to including this type of language in the actual ordinance of the ADU if you want to make that connection, but just to let you know that it's already on the books that we can actually enforce it today. So on to the discretionary process. This is third category. If someone comes forward and proposes something outside the development standards, say they want to place the ADU on top of the garage, a site development permit would be required, subject to approval of the planning commission. And also, we have identified certain areas that we aren't willing to deviate from. For instance, the ADU should not be closer to 4 feet from the property line, no larger than 1,200 square feet. The height must be within the development standards of the zoning district. No more than 2 bedrooms, and also the may not exceed the ADU per ordinance, and that's related to the deed restriction. They have to do the deed restriction, of course. So that are the ADU provisions. Any questions on the ADUs? Yes.
Just one quick question, Brenda. So I noticed on our discretionary that the max size could be 1,200 square feet versus 1,000 square feet on the mandatory. How did we get the 200 square foot difference on that?
The square footage is 1,200 square feet, comes from state law. We can allow for that up to 1,200 square feet. The reasoning why that number is important is because when we do an attached ADU to an accessory structure, under the non-mandatory, we calculate the square footage based upon the entire structure. So if you have an 800 square foot home or garage, you can only do a 200 square foot ADU potentially. So this allows them to come forward and ask for the ADU to measure separately.
So why 1,200 versus 1,000?
It's just reflective of state law. We
Okay.
can certainly lower it.
I mean, I
It's not a
just
magic number.
wondered. I saw there was a discrepancy why when we went discretionary, we added an additional 200 square feet to it. So
Yeah.
that was it. Thanks.
I think, Councilmember Miller, part of the reasoning on the 1,200 square foot of living area, and there's a difference between living area and the overall square footage of the whole property, which is total floor area as determines in state law, is just a recognition that there might be projects where it's actually a better project for the community to have the garage remain and be able to put an ADU upstairs above it. And we want to make sure that it can be big enough that it can happen on the one hand. On the other hand, we don't want that to be something that can just, automatically necessarily happen. We have a big issue in this community, as you all know, of parking. We also have a big issue in this community of views. And so as we compete to figure out, well, which one of those is more important, we felt like this was a good balance to where on a project that wasn't going to be detrimental to community views, that maybe it makes more sense to have the ADU upstairs, or in perhaps a project where parking is just such a huge premium in a neighborhood, it might be better to have it upstairs. And those are kind of the give and takes that we're trying to allow for here. And the 1,200 square foot was just sort of a max number that we came up with once you're going through this discretionary process.
Okay, I guess my only question was why on a mandatory we did 1,000 square foot and on a discretionary we did 1,200. I think there's a discrepancy there that people are going to, I'm asking it, so I'm assuming somebody who has a mandatory would say, why can't I have 1,200? Because if I go discretionary, I could. So
yeah, let me add on to what
Okay.
Mr. Munoz said. Under state law, size is defined by total floor area. And so what that means is if you have a garage, that number is included. So if you're looking at, say, 50% of total floor area, or the total floor area of an ADU will be limited to 50%. And so of the living area of the primary dwelling. Living area and floor area are two different things. Really, when we looked at the 1,200 square foot area, we had a lot of applicants who wanted to construct garages above detached garages. Because of the way we were measuring size under state law with total floor area, that would not allow that to occur in most circumstances because the size would be so small. So this would allow for slightly larger size to allow an ADU above a detached garage.
okay, that makes sense.
I have a question.
Mr. Villar, go ahead.
Can you go back to the affordable housing slide, please? So obviously I love that this is in here. My question though is to get the, to cover the cost of processing of the permit, do they have to have affordable housing for the lifetime of the ADU? Is there a time limit? I'm just thinking in my head, you know, obviously the intent here is to encourage more affordable housing without requiring it. Do we meet that? Can we get better at that if we say you only have to have affordable housing for 5 years or 3 years or something along those lines? Is that?
So under the current fee schedules, the language we have up there, and I was talking to Ms. Renders, but I believe our current affordable housing restriction is 55 years, which is standard of the affordable housing industry. We did propose language that could be incorporated into the ordinance that would be in perpetuity. So if under the current fee schedule, we could do it at 55 years. Do you know if our, or we could do it perpetuity, depending on the council's direction.
I'm just thinking which one encourages.
Sometimes when we think perpetuity, it is more of a disadvantage. It is more of a barrier. 55 years, I think, is seen in the industry as being more acceptable.
55 years. I mean, who's going to save the processing fee and I have to have affordable housing for 55 years? I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud right now, but okay.
I think part of the thinking is that 55 years and perpetuity kind of, in most cases, are sort of the same thing based on how construction of single-family homes occurs. It's very unusual to have a home that's going to be around for more than 55 years. I mean, it happens, but it's the rare exception.
Do we have an option to make it less than 55 years?
If that's the council's desire, we could do that. We'd be carving out something special for ADUs to add into the ordinance to do that.
Just in my head, it just thinks that you're encouraging more affordable housing if you make the term less, right? More like 5 to 10 years. That seems to make sense than 55 years. I don't know. I'm mulling it over in my head, but I'm obviously thinking out loud. Okay. That's all I had. I don't really even have a question or a comment. I'm just showing my hand.
Any other
here.
questions on the ADUs?
Mr. Frost.
Thanks, Brenda. Will you go back to the discretionary process? Just because I actually think this is the most important piece of what we did. Okay. I know we're going to look at each one individually, but generally speaking, we would require full parking on this, right? I just don't happen to see that bullet point.
So parking, we would require full parking in the coastal zone. Outside the coastal zone, the state law actually allows for an ADU to be established without requiring additional parking.
No, I know on number 1 and 2, but our discretionary process, my assumption is our discretionary process is the carrot to add back parking and add back setbacks, or right? I mean, that's the carrot, right? We have to approve 1 and 2, but if you want to build a nicer product, we'll let you go higher and we'll let you go 200 square feet bigger. And so I understand. I generally would think discretionary process, other than the ADU itself, we want to hold them more accountable to our underlying development standards, which would be parking, setbacks. I guess it'd probably just be those 2.
So setbacks, state law allows, we may not require more than 4 foot setback per state law.
But I believe, am I incorrect? Doesn't that apply to 1 and 2, or would that also apply to our discretionary process?
So if you look at the slide that's up on the screen right now, if you're going to do a discretionary ADU, we're going through the site development permit process, and so it is truly discretionary. I mean, you can come up with a project that fits your needs. We just came up with a list of things that you can't deviate from. So we don't want to be the total Wild West out there. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items are on the screen behind you. Those are the limitations that you are stuck with even with a discretionary. But other than those limitations, if you've got something that deviates from our other standards, then there's an opportunity to do that, which also, as you say, then gives us an opportunity to say, well, if you want that give, then we want the take of the parking.
Right. That's what I've always thought. It's a carrot. And so somebody can build something that doesn't have enough parking and doesn't have good setbacks, or they were saying you can build a little bit taller as long as you add back the parking, you get your HOA approval, and you have your setbacks. That I don't know that you would need to change it. I just hope that's the philosophy, because ultimately the problem with the state pushing this down is we're not allowed to hold people accountable for the development standards we like. So therefore the discretionary process should push the applicant back to those development standards. That would be what I would like to see out of that sort of management there. I realize density is a development standard, so we're not going to get that one back, but we can try to get parking back, try to get setbacks back.
So setbacks, correct me if I'm wrong, Jennifer, Patrick, we cannot require anything more than 4 feet. And parking, we're also limited in what we can require related to parking. For instance, they are mandatory approval. They are permitted to occupy an existing garage as a mandatory approval. If they were to come in and could we, attorneys, have another deviation, not be that they eliminate parking?
I'm trying to think of an example, and frankly, I'm just not smart enough to do it on the fly here, where the setback might come into play. So we're not going to give them more setback, but as you say, in this kind of give and take, we might get more setback back. So where someone could build it on the 4-foot line, maybe in exchange for something they want, we can get them to go to 5 or 6 feet, or maybe even back to, if it's a larger setback, a 12-foot setback, we might be able to get that. It just depends on a case-by-case basis on each project. And so that's why you need the discretionary project or process rather, because you're going to be looking at each project almost like you're issuing a conditional use permit. You're just looking at this to say, is this a good project for the community? We'll have findings will have to be made to justify it. They'll be going to the planning commission. There'll be an opportunity to get neighbor input. And so you'll have the process that we see so often in our planning commission, where they really roll up their sleeves and they try and figure out, okay, how do we make this a good project for the community to win for the developer and a win for the community? That's, ultimately the goal on these things. Although, obviously it's discretionary, so sometimes there's no's. But getting to your point, though, it's an opportunity for us to maybe get back some of the things that we'd like parking or setbacks.
Okay, thanks. That was my point. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. If you go back to that last slide, actually, just a clarification. In the ordinance, it says 1,200 square feet total floor area. That says 1,200 square feet of living space. We really mean total floor area. We don't mean living space. Is that correct? That's the slide is sort of a misnomer.
Well, no. So 1,200 square feet of living area is bigger than 1,200 square feet of floor area. So in the discretionary world, what we're saying is we've got these limitations in the categories A and B. We have these limitations if you want to get a ministerial approval. If you want to go through a process, so just getting back to the give and take conversation we had, we will let someone have a bigger ADU. You can go as big as 1,200 square foot of living area, which is likely going to be bigger than 1,200 square feet of floor area. But we might want something in exchange, like getting the parking back. That's where this opportunity for that give and take comes into play.
Right, but I think you just contradicted yourself. 1,200 square feet of total floor area
Did I say it backwards?
cannot be larger than 1,200
Sorry.
square feet of living space, right? So
1,200 square feet
in
of
the
living
top of
area.
page 33, total floor area of the detached ADU shall not exceed 1,200 feet.
So if you're above a garage
Right.
with 1,200 square feet of living area, almost by definition, that's going to exceed 1,200 square feet of floor area, because the floor area would take into account the garage. What we're trying to do
You
is
physically
say,
cannot be 1,200 square feet above 1,200 square feet and be inside of 1,200 square feet total. Right? Is the scenario not, if you want 1,200 square feet of total floor area and you're above a garage, you got a 600 square foot garage and a 600 square foot ADU above it?
yes. But if you want to
can't
have
be bigger than that.
if you have a 1,200 square foot garage, you can't build anything above it.
Correct.
Okay. But what we're saying is in this discretionary process, you could have a 1,200 square foot of living area, not floor area, living area, ADU above the garage. So this is an opportunity to encourage the garage to stay. We'll give you more than you might otherwise get, but there's going to be some things that we're going to probably want. And it's not a guarantee you're going to get it. It's going to be discretionary. If you're blocking an important public view, we're not going to approve it. I'm just as an example.
Got it. Okay. Is it clear to the planning staff how this is going to work?
Yes, it is.
Much more clear than
We're trying to
explain it.
As long as it's clear to your staff who have to deal with this stuff. I mean, I'm looking at the ordinance and I think I understand what we're trying to do. I just want to make sure in practice that this is easily executable.
It's complicated. That's why we've been dealing with it for so many months. But it's finally
So,
sunk in here. So
At the end of the day, trying to allow stuff that might not otherwise have been able to be done to make better ADUs actually fit.
With some limitations.
With limitations.
We don't want to see a 3,500 square foot of living area ADU. So we had to come up with some limitations. That's
right. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Vixort.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just really one question to help me understand the height limitations. So if I remember the slide correctly, it was up to the whatever the height limitation is for whatever the house is zoned for, or help me out understanding what that means.
So
ADU above the garage.
If you think of it, 3 categories: the mandatory approvals, the ministerial approvals that will fall within our ordinance, and then the discretionary approvals. Okay. In those first 2 categories, the maximum height is 16 feet. If you want to go through the discretionary process, you can go as high as the height in the underlying zoning district. So if the highest your house could be is 28 feet, you can have a 28-foot ADU if you go through the discretionary process.
Any other questions for the staff? Mayor Pro Tem Miller.
Brenda, real quick, I guess I was a little confused. This is a discretionary process, but you just said that we have to allow the setback, the 4-foot setback. We can't require any more than that. How could we be required to allow those in a discretionary process? I'm confused about that.
So if somebody came to us with either a category A or category B,
I understand that. I'm talking about just purely the
If
discretionary.
they came to us with one that doesn't meet our criteria, what we're saying is no matter what they come to us with, we're not going to let them have less of a setback than 4 feet. So if they come to us with 3-foot setback, we're going to say no. Okay. But we wouldn't have to say yes if it doesn't comply with all our other standards. If they're at 4 feet, we can still say no.
So why couldn't we require more than 4 feet on a discretionary?
Well, we can. That's the point.
But I thought
No, what we're
was
saying
Nesky
is
just said that
we're not going to vary from the 4 feet. We're not going to let you go to 3'9". Okay. The most we'll ever let you have is 4 feet. And if you're discretionary, even at 4 feet, we might say no based on your other criteria. But we're just telling people in advance, don't bother coming and asking.
I understand that, but that's not what Ms. Wisniewski said.
what I was saying is that per state law, we can't require more than 4 feet. But you're saying in the discretionary process through the evaluation of design and compatibility, we could require more than 4 feet to ensure that we meet the findings for the site development permit.
Okay.
So in essence,
All right.
we could require it, and based upon that basis.
So
Okay.
think of it this way. Once you're in category C, we can say no.
Right. That's
You're
what I
not
was-
going to get it
Yeah.
unless we say okay.
Okay. That's
Apologize
where I
for
was confused.
oversimplifying it. You're right.
Okay. Like you said, this is complex and it's hard to understand. So, okay, I understand that now.
Mr. Villar.
I would like to go back to the affordable housing thing now. I have it in my head. I would like to see it, the restriction on affordable housing to be 5 years and you will get your permit fees covered. I think that just meets the spirit of what we're trying to do to encourage more affordable housing. If you make it 55 years or even in perpetuity, there's probably going to be nobody that says, yeah, that's worth the $1,500 processing fee or whatever that cost is going to be. But if you say, hey, you can do it, if you do it for 5 years, you're at a minimum, then your processing fee will be waived. You do run the risk of, well, now after 5 years, you're going to crank that rent on me and I'm going to get kicked out. But Mayor Pro Tem Miller did kind of mention to me that there are some other things that are in place that could control that rent a little bit. And it's I think it's a risk that I'm willing to take because it gets more in the spirit of what we're trying to do.
So let me just, from a process standpoint, suggest that if that's something you'd like to see, we should wait till we hear from the public, and then that would be part of a motion once we start talking about
Okay,
the
great.
ordinance down the road.
Okay.
And if I may, Mr. Mayor, a couple of points I'd like to make before you open public comment. Before we forget, one of the things we'd like to see tonight in your discussion is picking a date for our next meeting on this. So we have a second reading date. And then we, just so you know, on the meeting of September 21st, we'll be bringing back a resolution that will establish the ADU permit fee, which this ordinance contemplates will have. We think the way the timing will work out based on the date we're at least going to propose. I'm getting some head nods that maybe it's already been figured out for the next reading, that those two things will kind of become effectively at the same time. And then the last thing that I think for your discussion you should at least think about, because I think between now and the second reading, as the development community looks at this, you might get some input on this from them. And rather than not having thought about it tonight and maybe being in a position where you change your mind before the second reading, let me just put this issue out there for you. The way state law reads is that the law we're talking about is set to expire in 5 years. So what we have interpreted that to mean, it's not, the law doesn't actually say this, what we interpret that to mean is that we can impose a deed restriction that in 5 years it has to be owner occupied, because this law won't exist anymore. So there is a better than average chance that the state will come along and come up with some other law that might invalidate that kind of a deed restriction. I mean, you just have to be realistic that that could happen, but maybe not. And I'm willing to bet that the development community is going to prefer that we don't have that deed restriction on the front end. So this is a pure policy choice. I mean, there's no question, the way the law is set up right now, this law expires in 5 years. So if you're coming with a restriction that doesn't take place until 5 years, there shouldn't be an issue. But if that's important to you, just understand you're gambling to some degree that the state won't come in and change that on you between now and then. So you really kind of have to make a decision. Is it worth having it in here now, or is it something that you don't want to have in here now, knowing that it will be a little bit controversial with the development community? I'm just going to put that out there just bluntly so that you can talk about that as part of your discussions. And with that, I will be quiet.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for the staff right now?
There are the last two items I wanted to mention for that ordinance. One was the joint use parking facilities. This is a recommendation that came out of the parking implementation plan. Currently, joint parking is a concept where a business can locate their parking in another property's area that has excess parking. Currently, it's 300 square feet. 300 feet, and the implementation plan recommended to extend that to a quarter mile. So this provides a lot more flexibility for our business community. And the other amendment is to improve our public notification process. The Planning Commission wants to ensure that our community is aware of public hearings as they come up. So for non-residential projects, they will be posted on site, as well as a noticing will be going out 14 days prior to the hearing versus 10 days. So that is the local coastal program amendment, those two pieces. So with that, our recommendation is to introduce the two ordinances and approve the resolution allowing us to submit the LCPA. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions on the last couple items? Mayor Pro Tem Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Wisniewski, could you put up the parking piece again? So I'm a little concerned about this because we had Measure H run against this run through the city a few years ago that says we can't make any changes in the zoning down in and the reason I bring it up is because you use the town center as the example, but we can't change that without a vote of the people, correct?
The parking regulations are actually in our zoning code, not in the town center plan. So this provision applies citywide.
I guess, Mr. Munoz, I'll ask the question to you. Because it was a resident-run referendum or ballot measure that was very clear that we couldn't change any zoning in that district without a vote of the people, how does that affect this?
So what it actually says is we can't change the town center plan without a vote of the people. And so things that apply outside of the town center plan, if it's already part of our zoning that applies anyway, we could change. I have to admit, I've been focused on ADUs for tonight. I didn't go back and look at this nuance, but I have no reason to think that planning staff doesn't have it right, and that's what it says.
That was my only concern on that because of the graphic that you used. Could that be a problem down there? I have no problem with this. I think it's a good idea. But I'm concerned if we implement this, are we opening ourselves up to litigation over it? So, okay, thanks.
All right. Then I will momentarily open the public hearing. Before I do, and we'll get this at the end of the meeting, but I'll confirm with staff, the second reading of these ordinances will be on Monday, August 23rd. Is that correct, Mr. City Manager?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. So we, because these are special meetings, we just were able to confirm that right before this meeting started, but time to be determined, but probably 5:30 again, just for full transparency and as much notification to the public as we can get them. And with that, I will now open the public hearing. Looks like we have one public speaker, Michael Liu from Placentia. If you'd like to come up and speak, please.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I have the owners who they are the residents of City of Dana Point, and this is actually their second one. Their second property, and you're kind of in the awkward situation where they're trying to develop the property. It's a residential with the ADU that's been pre-approved by the planning department back on year 2019, October. And due to the pandemic, so thing has been delayed. And so to the stage, we're being presented by Brenda and about the new changing of the code, the adoption of the code. And I brought this to the owners, and they fully respect and they fully support the new resolution that is proposing for the best of the City of Dana Point. But since they are probably the few owners who are in an awkward situation, which their plan is already being approved by the planning department, years prior, and right now they're in the threshold of getting a building approval. So, just maybe something we already spoke to Brenda to have an exception of they can carry and finish the rest of their building plans. And I know it's going to be a different, if this is being adopted, this project might be a different scenario, but that's what the owner they're here to voice out. That hope they can, pretty much continue what they have so far. To the point of the getting the approval. And we met, I met with Brenda and Patrick a couple weeks ago about this, and we do support the new resolution and respect whichever the solution you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Liu. That is our only public comment. All right, then the public hearing is closed. And I will move the recommended actions as written in the staff report.
Second.
Okay. I will also just make a few comments, I guess, and then we'll go around the horn. First of all, I want to thank the staff, in particular, Jennifer, Brenda, Patrick, everyone and the city staff, but they did a lot of work to try to solve this, and everyone in Brenda's department. A lot of work to try to solve this very complex problem of how do we work within a very tight, constrained box and still try to make ways to have better ADUs. And anyway, thank you guys for doing this. I really don't have a lot of concerns. The first two items, the noticing and the parking, we've talked about those way back in September, and we thought they were great ideas then. I still think they're a great idea now. I have a question, Brenda. In our code, what does it say about which RENA category of affordable you must be in order to get free fees? Do you know?
The language actually is in the fee study. Where is it? So it talks about for extremely low, very low, or low income.
I think, okay, just going forward, I think 5 years is too short for low income because people are going to game that game. So it's something that, to your credit, you want them to go back and look at. If it said extremely low or very low, then I think maybe 5 years is enough that someone won't try to game the system. But because of that, you can still get quite a lot of rent in a low income. And I think people might game that one. Just something for us to think about as we go forward. Otherwise, I have nothing, no issues or concerns with this. Thank you, staff, for doing it. And I'll open it up to other council members. Comments? Mayor Pro Tem Miller?
Thank you. And Councilmember Valari, you brought up a good point, and there are some protections around this. I can't remember what, I think it was AB 1384 or something came out that basically gave protection on to renters that you couldn't increase rents more than 5% plus CPI unless it was greater than 10%. That number would be greater than 10%, and then 10% is your cap. So you would have that protection in there going forward to go against that gaming. But you're not wrong. I mean, a low income households, the rents aren't really that low on what you can draw from them. So my only concern is if we make that change tonight, then we have to come back for another first reading, correct?
Now, if we make any changes before the first reading, if you give us the direction which you want to read, that's incorporated into the first reading.
And that would be tonight.
That's
So
tonight.
we can put that in tonight, and this is still
We'll
a first
still be,
reading.
as long as we do it as part of the first reading, then when we get the second reading, it's already there.
Okay. So I don't know if 5 years is the right number on that, maybe 10. I don't know. I'm not in this industry. So, I would defer maybe to this Mayor Federico or Councilmember Frost because they do some of this stuff. I don't know what that right number is. And I would be okay putting something, again, 55 years is a long time. That is perpetuity.
And let me clarify, by the way, we had a chance to dig around a little bit while you were discussing, and it's not 55 years. That was something that got talked about at Planning Commission. It's actually perpetuity is what our code says.
Okay. But, Mr. Munoz hit it right on the head. You're hard pressed to find houses in the city over 55 years old because most of them get scraped and rebuilt. So either way, I don't know what the right number is on that. Maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's 5 years. I don't know. I mean, and I'm open to anything, but I would like to decide that tonight so we can get this first reading done.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I do agree with you, Mayor. Is the low income does kind of open it up to some wounds there. Can we take that out and just have the cost of processing for extremely low and very low? Do we have to include low income?
If the council wanted to include, this is the language that comes from our fee study. So if you want to include language in the ADU ordinance to make it specific to ADUs, you could certainly make some changes you wish.
So that would be my recommendation is to give the waive the fee for the permit for extremely low and very low and for 5 years.
So understand what that would mean if you made that change, that if somebody came in with moderate, they could also get the fee waiver, but it would be perpetual. But, your goal being to give some sort of incentive, they'll have a limited amount of time.
Yes.
So just want to make sure everybody understands how that would work. So if someone came in with a project and they wanted to get a fee waiver, they only wanted to be restricted to moderate income, then that in exchange for the fee waiver, it would be deed restricted for perpetuity. But what you're proposing in order to encourage low and very low is that if they did it that way, they would get the fee waiver and the restriction would only exist for whatever the period of time that you're talking about.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, you said moderate, but we're showing low up here. You mean low?
He meant low.
Okay, all right. Oh, all right.
Yes.
I was confused. Okay. I understand.
Yeah.
Mr. McSorrick?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess while we're talking about it, as usual, I'm probably missing something. I'm trying to get my head around what we're talking about with the perpetuity or or 5 years or 10 years or whatever it is, if they, and again, hopefully somebody will clarify this for me. I mean, if I'm understanding it correctly, you want to lower the restriction to the lower the amount of years, say 5 years, would encourage a builder to build, because then after 5 years, you raise the rent, right? And I guess what I'm having trouble getting my head around is if that's what we're talking about, if I'm understanding it right, I don't know if I am, but what is that? Isn't the point of building affordable housing so that people can stay in it for more than 5 years? And so again, so I'm just going to put that out there. I hope somebody can kind of explain to me. Not yet though, because I want to bring up one other thing. So I guess I'm not yet, before I move on, I'm not yet convinced that lowering the amount of time is the right thing to do. But again, I'm open to hear what everybody else has to say on that. But I think the city attorney had asked us to talk about one other thing regarding what we want to do, say in 5 years, when the state law expires. And I guess one thing that I'm thinking, and I hate doing this on the dice, but it was just brought up now. And so again, I'm just kind of thinking out loud, and I'd be interested in hearing anyone else with their comments. But I mean, we're making these changes right now because we want to provide certainty to our residents, to our builders, so that when people come in, they know what to expect if they're going to look to build an ADU. And up until now, before the state law went into effect, I think we had that certainty before the state came along and made these changes. So a thought that crosses my mind, and obviously I'm open to persuasion on this because I haven't had a chance to really think it through, but why don't we look at sunsetting our ordinance in accordance with the state law? If that expires in 5 years, why wouldn't we sunset our ordinance in 5 years and go back to what? Now, I guess everybody's going to assume that in some time between now and those 5 years expire, the state legislature may do something. But if the warning was, we don't know what they're going to do, and so we might put something into effect that's going to change because they're going to make a different decision within those 5 years. Why don't we just keep it uniform and say, well, we'll sunset our ordinance, and then whatever changes come about, we're going to have to revisit it at that point. But just a thought I'm putting out there. Like I said, not fully formed thought, because it was brought up as to what's happening. So I hope I've addressed that issue that was asked to be talked about. With that, I will stop talking and turn it over to anyone else who has thoughts on that. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you. Mr. Frost, do you have any discussion, comments?
Thank you. I echo you, Mr. Mayor, Brenda, Patrick, Jen. Thank you very much. Coming to a compromise on this was probably not easy, especially since some of us have strong opinions. But you did a great job and you got it done quick. And to Councilmember Vixorik's point, this should give people like you in the audience good understanding of your go forward direction, and it should give people who are interacting with their architect next week good direction of what they can do. The affordable, if we wanted to knock it down to 5 years, I think that would probably spur the creation of some more. Of course, I don't know if that's a policy, a strategy I had necessarily heard before of creating more ADUs in the community. I thought we were sort of taking a look at the state law and interpreting as close back to our development standards as possible. But if we are looking to add these and make them more palatable, the more costs we can reduce from the builder, and the lower we can shrink that sort of income restriction, the more we will create. We will create more. Is 5 years? I tend to think 5 years is a good deal for somebody building it. I don't know. We'd have to figure out our total fees, right? And then go back and, so I don't know that we should come up with a year time frame now, only because we probably should do a calculation to determine what would be fair, in my opinion. Unless you can guess off the top of your head what I saw you looking on your computer. Is that what you were doing? Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Villar?
So let me clarify my thought process for Councilmember Vixoric and for the rest is, and I'm going to make up a number here for the processing fee of $1,500. For the likelihood of somebody saving $1,500 because the benefit is I'm going to rent my property out for lower than market value in perpetuity or 55 years, they're not likely to do that. We're probably going to get nobody to actually do that. It's a great thing to have on paper, but it's not going to spur any affordable housing, the spirit of what we're trying to do. But if you say, hey, you only have to rent it out at less than market value for 5 years, now that $1,500 comes into play. So let's say that my mother-in-law, who would fit into the the very low income category, and I want to make an ADU for her, hey, I'm going to save that $1,500, and now I get an ADU for my mother-in-law. I don't have to pay the processing fee, and it fits the low income or very low income category, meets our RENA numbers. Like it helps, and maybe that encourages me that when she moves out, then maybe I stick with that number and rent it on to somebody else. I do understand what you're saying though, but after 5 years, now you can get that person booted out and now or double the rent. But I think what Mayor Pro Tem Miller is saying, there's probably some other protections against that rent being raised. And the reason I came up with 5 years is most people don't rent for more than a few years. It's not, when you're renting an ADU, you're probably not going to be in it for 15 or 20 years, right? It's probably going to be a little bit less. So to me, the 5 years seems right because I think it will encourage, it'll make somebody really think about, wow, for 5 years, I can rent this out for a very low income and save that cost. That was the thought process. But, I'd be willing to figure out what that number is. To me, 5 years seems about right. If we take out the low income, because I agree with the mayor that the low income one really does help, does cause some gaming of the system.
If I could interject on this, a suggestion kind of from the side of the table is that rather than putting things related to fees in our ordinance, that typically they would be in our fee resolution. We will be bringing back the fee resolution for this specific permit, and we could adjust the specific language you're looking at here as part of that. It would give you a little more time to think about this issue. And it might be a more appropriate place for us to put it. Second thought, for whatever it's worth, as part of our housing element that's out there right now, we're going to get credit for ADUs based on a complicated formula that I won't try and explain during this 8-year period. After this period, we think that we'll probably only get credit for what was actually built during this period, and maybe that formula will occur again going forward. So you might want to consider that 8-year time frame as an important milestone. So maybe make it 8 years instead of 5 years, just so that they are still deed restricted as affordable when we get into the next round. So we'll continue to get credit for them.
Thank you, everybody there, for answering those. I very much like not making this policy here on the dais tonight. And the only reason we all feel under pressure to try to have this discussion now is because if we don't get this first reading done, we're delaying this thing and defeating the purpose of all the hard work staff put into it. So I would like to address this in the fee schedule, if you're good with that, Mr. Villar. And just for the record, real quick, the very low income threshold for Orange County for RENA, $47,100 a year. So that's the very low. Low is $75,000 $300. So you start equating that to monthly rents. People are going to game this game if we're not careful. So I like the 8 years, and we need to go look and figure out what that threshold is, that it encourages affordability, not encourages building and gaming, creating a loophole. So with that said, I think everyone's had a chance. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? The motion and second were to go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem Miller.
Did Councilmember Vicsorik's question about sunsetting the ordinance? No, we haven't really addressed that. Other than my only concern about it, sunsetting our ordinance is if we sunset the ordinance, we don't have an ordinance because it doesn't automatically revert back to the previous ordinance. Would that be correct? And so we'd be right back in the same spot, having to come up with an ordinance again. I guess I'm concerned. I don't understand why. I guess I'd like a better explanation of why you want to try to do something like that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. I mean, it's a great point. I guess I didn't fully state what I was thinking. I mean, my idea was really what we had before the state law was instituted would revive. That's part of, if we were going to put it in the motion into our ordinance that it sunsets, we would just leave it at it sunsets. Now we have nothing. Now we're stuck with state law, whatever it is, because if the law expires, we don't know what the state law would be at that point. I guess I would say, because I think I don't think we're not content with what we had. We're making this change because it's state law. So the idea would be if state law expires and we can go back to what we had, I didn't add that part in, but I would say we would revive the previous law that we had. And, that's what I had in mind. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, and it sort of brings up now that I understand where you were going with that, to the city attorneys can, I guess we all assume that the state ADU laws are never going to go away, but if they did, do we need to sunset this one, or could we just vote to just strike it all one day? Can a future council just say, we're going to tear this one up?
Yes, you can do that.
Okay. Would that be difficult to do?
Nope. You'd have to recognize you'd have a bunch of legal non-conforming uses out there that would continue to have rights, but
sure,
that
happens either way.
Regular zoning ordinance. It's more complicated once we get to the LCPA for the coastal zone to undo that, but for the rest of the city, for this ordinance, it would not be difficult.
Okay, interesting. All right, Mr. Villar.
Just one more question for clarification. So anything that we decide on this fee waiver does not have to be in the ordinance. It lives on its own. We can make up whatever we want as far as the number of years and whether it's going to be very low, and depending on the conversation we have about the fee waiver. It does not have to be in the ordinance at all.
That is correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Madam Clerk, would you like to call the vote?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Frost. Councilmember Vicsorik.
Aye.
Councilmember Villar.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Miller.
Aye.
Mayor Federico.
Aye.
That motion passes 5-0. Thank you.
Just to clarify, Mr. Mayor, in case this wasn't obvious to you, we've only addressed the ADU ordinance. You have the other items that we still need to address by the council.
I'll move both those items as recommended by staff.
Did I not move everything?
I'm sorry, I
as-
misunderstood your motion. I thought I heard you only say that part. Take it back.
No, it was his motion, not mine.
Yeah, let's clarify, Madam Clerk. I made the motion to adopt all of the recommended actions as written. Is that okay?
That's fine if that's how
Okay.
you
Is that what you got?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Miller.
Thank you. Good looking out, Mr. City Attorney. Appreciate it. There's no unfinished business or new business. And council reports, Mr. Frost.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have nothing to report, and Ms. Shana, I will get you my meetings. Thanks.
Mr. Villar.
I've turned in my meetings and I have nothing to report.
Mr. Vicsorik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Nothing to report. I'll turn in my list of meetings to the clerk after the meeting.
All right. Mayor Pro Tem Miller.
I have nothing to report, and I did not turn in my list of meetings. So I guess I'm waiting for your email. Thanks.
I have turned in my list of meetings. I have nothing to report. Mr. Munoz,
I have nothing this evening.
Mr. Killebrew.
Nothing, sir.
All right. That brings us to adjournment. We will have a special meeting on Monday, August 23rd. I believe at 5:30, but time.
It will be a regular adjourned meeting.
A regular
special
adjourned meeting. Thank you. We will have a regular adjourned meeting Monday, the 23rd of August at 5:30 here in this room. And we are adjourned.